it's Andy, and today I'm coming to you with a video which is another recommendations video, and this is for World War II historical fiction. So my last video I did on the recommendations was historical fiction that was not related to World War II. So this is going to be one specific to World War II historical fiction because it is a large collection of my historical fiction library. It is a time period that I love reading about, that I love reading historical fictions about, and that I think we have a lot more to learn from than we give it credit for. And for that I am so thankful to all of these authors and to all of the other authors that I have on my shelves who have written these novels. There's so much more than what I've got on my shelves, and definitely so much more than the ones I've pulled. The ones I've pulled are my particular favourites, or the ones that I feel are particularly poignant. I do have one that I want to mention as an honorary mention within this, and that is The Twins of Auschwitz, the inspiring true story of a young girl surviving Mengeles hell by Eva Moses Kaur with Lisa Rojane Bakeri. This is not a fiction novel. This is in fact a little memoir. It's a very short memoir about Eva and her twin, who were identical twins, and their time in Auschwitz and their time in Dr. Mengeles' lab. If you don't know who Dr. Mengele is, he was a Nazi doctor who was obsessed with twins and obsessed on experimenting on twins, and he did the most horrific and disgusting things to people, and a lot of his records were destroyed, and you know, we're now only finding out the kind of horrific things he did to these people. So this is from Eva. Her twin unfortunately died, not in Auschwitz but before Eva, and this tells their story of what happened to them while they were at the camp. Now I'm just going to get into, I've got a stack here of World War II historical fictions. These are some of my favourites, and each of them has a sort of special place in my heart. I really hope you enjoy them. So the first is what I see as a classic because it's one of the first historical fiction books that I read that really got me into World War II historical fiction especially, and it is one that I loved and that a lot of people I know love, and that I'm sure if you had to read it at school you probably also loved or possibly hated because you had to read it at school, and that is Goodnight Mr. Tom. I have a beautiful edition over there of Goodnight Mr. Tom. When I saw it I had to get it, but this is the sort of original edition that I have had since school. This tells the story of a boy named Willie who is sent from London to the countryside and is sent to live with this man called Mr. Tom. And Mr. Tom is a curmudgeon. He is the grumpy in a grumpy sunshine. He is, you know, just the grumpiest, nastiest man, and Willie is terrified of being sent home with this man. It turns out, as it always does, this man has a heart of gold, and he treats Willie much better than he could have ever imagined. And this basically follows the relationship of Willie and Mr. Tom and how they grow to sort of come together, and the friends that Willie makes, because his life in London is very different from his life in the country. He comes sort of, you know, skinny, scrawny, emaciated, underfed, through not just the fact that rations and things were in place, but because his mother was quite abusive, and Mr. Tom gets him fed up, gets him, you know, eating vegetables and growing vegetables, and it's just this beautiful story about Willie and how he sort of comes out of his shell. I love this. This is horrendously triggering for people, especially people who have suffered abuse and grief, because we find out Mr. Tom's wife and son have died years and years ago, and that's why he's so grumpy and doesn't want to be involved. So this also is Willie sort of bringing Mr. Tom out of his shell and into the community, and it's just such a beautiful story, and I highly recommend it. But obviously the abuse in this is quite bad, so just watch out for that. There is also a character in this called Zach, who is a Jewish boy, and even Willie, being a child in London and being on the Allied side, the good side of the war, still thinks bad things about Jews, and through meeting Zach he understands that Jews are not, you know, big scary monsters. They're not dangerous, they're not different in a way that's gonna, you know, prevent you from living your life. It's just that they follow a slightly different religion, and it's not that deep, you know, it's not that deep. So yeah, I absolutely love this. Seeing it through the view of a young boy who's becoming a teenager is just fantastic, and showing this bond between Mr. Tom and Willie is just absolutely fantastic. Next up is one that's more recent that I've read, and this is Codename Helene by Ariel Lohan. This is one of the... This book just absolutely blew me away. This is about a woman whose name is Nancy, and Nancy is sort of taken on as a spy during World War II for the Allied forces. She basically is in charge of the British that are helping the French Revolutionary, or the French Resistance, sorry, not revolutionaries. And, you know, she can get them food, she can get them supplies, she can get them weapons. But if you mouth off to her, you're going to regret it. And this is actually based off of a true story of a woman that existed, and Nancy is the woman. It is based off Nancy's story, but it's a fictionalised version of the things that Nancy and other spies and things did at the time. This is a fantastic look at what it was like for these resistance fighters in France, and the sort of things that we were trying to do across the channel to help them. And, you know, I love the fact that so many women were involved in World War II. You'll see that as a theme through this. So many women were involved in World War II and we're not giving them their credit. Nancy saved possibly thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives with the work that she did. And it's only now, I think this was published in 2020, and we're only just finding out about Nancy now. This is actually a picture of Nancy. And she is a badass. Like, she is a badass. And she specifically wears a single lipstick that they created called Victory Red for the war to keep women going. And she prizes this lipstick. She is still, like, not a girly girl, because she is a grown woman, but she cares very much about hygiene and her appearance and, you know, things like that. But she is not afraid to get down and dirty. And I just love Nancy. Like, I wish I could have met Nancy and just been like, I love you. Because this woman is incredible. I know it's a fictionalised version, but it's only slightly fictionalised. But it is still fictionalised. Just... ugh. The next book I have moves us over to the US, and that is The War Outside by Monica Hesse. Monica Hesse is another one like Route 70s who writes sort of alternate areas of history. So this is a book about the internment camps that they had in the US. So this is specifically one, I can't remember where it is, Crystal City in Iowa. So this specifically was for German and Japanese citizens. So if you were a German family, or you were a Japanese, or even vaguely Asian looking person, Asian background, you were put into these internment camps after Pearl Harbor, because they believed that basically to kind of make sure that nobody was out against the US on their homeland, like to be terrorists or anything like that, they would just round them up and put them in camps and treat them not very great. They were definitely treated better than, you know, there's nothing compared to the Holocaust that happened in Europe. But the fact of the matter is, these families were rounded up and put into these internment camps and not treated like they really should have been. And this gives this view of this German girl and this Japanese girl and their sort of way of dealing with that, learning how to live in this place, and the ways that it could still be dangerous, that you're stuck in this place, and the things that they had to endure. This is fantastic. I love that we get to see this sort of view of it. There was something similar, We're Not Free by Tracy Chee, I think it was, which is a similar concept but not quite the same, because this is like adult historical fiction. That one I think is young adult. It's still historical fiction, but it's slightly different. But I absolutely love Monica Hesse, and you'll see her again in this list. The next one again is a Monica Hesse, and that is They Went Left. This is about Zofia, who is sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau with her family, and when they arrived she went right and her family was sent left. And this is 3 years after, and 3 years after they were rescued, and Zofia is trying to find her family. She's trying to find out what happened to them, where they are. She believes that they may still be alive, but she was just separated from them, and this is her hunt to try and find her family and to bring them all back together again. This is really, really harrowing. It is, you do see some of what it was like in the camp as well as what it's like afterwards, because afterwards it was just pure chaos. Houses of people who were put into these concentration camps were given to other citizens, and you would go home and someone was living in your house. using your crockery, sleeping in your bed, and you had no rights to take it back. You had no rights to be able to claim that house back. People had hidden gold and precious things in the gardens and buried them, and they could go home and find that they'd been dug up or that they were still there. And records for people who were killed, some of them were destroyed, and there was places like the Red Cross who were trying to generate more and more records for people who survived so that they could find their families. And it was just a case of wandering, signing up to all these different things until you found someone. And that is absolutely terrifying. Now, if something happens, we have a thing on Facebook where you can mark yourself in a safe. They couldn't do that back then. They had to hunt through Europe because there was many different concentration camps, many different places that they took them, and families were just ripped apart in ways that I can't even imagine. And this is about our main character, like I say, Zofia, trying to find that family. The next one, again, sends us somewhere interesting, and that is The Storyteller of Casablanca by Fiona Valpy. This is set, again, during World War II. I don't know why I don't know why I said that. Obviously, this is set during World War II, but this is set in Casablanca, and this is a family who have escaped and gone to Casablanca, where they are hoping to then go on to the US to escape the Nazis, and it is taking longer and longer for them to get themselves out of the country, and the Nazis are getting slowly closer and closer. This also has a split timeline, which you know I love, and this is 70 years after as well, where there is a family who have moved into this home that the family back in the war had been staying in, and the daughter sort of trying to discover what happened to the family, to one of their main character from the war period, who is Josie. So Zoe, who is in sort of present time, and Josie, who is in the past. Zoe's trying to find out what has happened to Josie, and the twist at the end of this, it took me out. This also includes a sort of sideline story about a famous woman whose name I cannot for the life of me remember, who came to Casablanca during the war to entertain the Nazis and things like that, but really she was, you know, acting as a spy. And again, these wonderful, wonderful women who are getting involved, getting their hands dirty, doing so much for the Allies and doing so much for the war efforts. It's just absolutely fabulous watching Casablanca go from this tropical paradise to this nightmare scenario, and then in the future, you know, you're following that and you're trying to figure out what happened to these characters. Did they get out? Did they get away? Were they killed? And then just that tension of not knowing, it's just fantastic. I love these dual timelines. I love the idea that someone from the future is trying to find out what happened, because we should really, really not be letting go of the past. Again, another Fiona Valpy, and this is The Dressmaker's Gift. I remember this book really, really just hit me hard as well. Most of them did, but this one I specifically remember because this is about seamstresses, which again is another word that I can't say, who worked in Paris at the time of Nazi occupation, and then a couple of generations later, the granddaughter of one of these seamstresses comes back to Paris and sort of tries to find out what happened with her grandmother, and there is a lot to do with the seamstresses and their jobs and the French resistance, stitching notes into clothes and things like that, and the danger they were putting themselves in. It was just, oh. There's also that feeling as well of not knowing who you can trust, because you don't know who's in the resistance, you don't know who's a Nazi spy, you don't know, you know, if the person next to you is informing on you. It was such a fantastic read, and the friendships that these women had as well in the past during the war were just unbelievable. These women were unbelievable, and I'm just going to keep saying that throughout this video. Next one's a classic that, again, I can't really miss out if I'm recommending World War II historical fictions, and that is The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. And this is about our main character, whose name I can't remember. But she is being sort of transported from one part of Germany to another to get out of sort of fighting zones, and on the way her brother dies, and she ends up living with a family, and they are sort of harbouring a Jew, and she is torn between being a good little Nazi, like literally there's like I can't remember what they're called, but like the like boys clubs and like kids clubs to train them to be Nazis at a very young age, between being a good Nazi and being a good German and being a good person, because she also, as the title suggests, book thief, she wants to read these books that are being burned, that are being banned by the Nazis, and doesn't understand what's wrong with stories. She doesn't understand why stories are dangerous and why they want to get rid of them. And it's just so wonderful to see her grow with this family and, you know, have that conversation with this Jewish man and learn that he is a good, kind person, that he is a person, he is a human, he's not subhuman like the Nazis are putting out. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful story. And the twist of all twists, the way this is written is so well done. It is written from the perspective, and the narrator is Death. Death is personified and is the narrator in this, and he is watching our main character, Liesel. He is watching her life and sort of talking about it, and the way that death surrounds her, from her brother dying, from, you know, the bombings that are going on in Germany, and it's just, it's so beloved for a reason. Next up are two books that are a series but kind of aren't, and that is Codename Verity and Rose Under Fire. There's also the Enigma game and Firebird that ElizabethWII has written, which also are set in the same setting. So the Enigma game is sort of during these, and then Firebird is on a different, like somewhere else in the world. And then the Pearl Thief is set before this. So if you want to get the whole thing, that's all of them. But Codename Verity is about our main character who's been captured. She is a spy, and her name is Verity. Her codename is Verity. And she is telling this story about Maddie and Queenie and how they met and how she came to be there to sort of the Nazis that are interrogating her. And she is telling this story and telling the story. You and the interrogator start to learn that she's telling her own story and telling how she got there, and talking about her life and how she became a spy and the things she knows and things like that. But the heart of these stories really is about female pilots. So Maddie is a female pilot, and Queenie, or Verity, is a spy that she transports around Europe and across the Channel. I believe ElizabethWII actually has some experience as a pilot, and she loves to write about female pilots. I can guarantee that most people didn't know that a lot of women flew planes during World War II. They flew broken down planes, and like, not broken down, but like planes that were needing repaired, and planes that had been nearly repaired, back and forth to the front line. However, these women were not allowed to engage in battle, so they were not allowed to have any sort of guns on the planes, which meant they were flying a British plane or an American plane across Nazi occupied territory with no protection at all, basically. And these women were just women who, you know, flew for fun, flew to help spray crops. They had a pilot's license in some way, and they were brought forward to do these flights. Also with other men who had been injured and couldn't fight but could still fly, they were also given this job. It was called the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, I believe. And Rose Under Fire is also on a similar vein, so it's set after Codename Verity, and this follows Rose, who is an American pilot who has come over to help with the efforts, and she also does the same job as Maddie. She ferries these planes over into and out of Europe, and also spies and things like that. They parachute them in. Rose, however, is caught and put into a concentration camp, and it's called Ravensbrück. I'm not going to try and do the actual accent, but it was a specific concentration camp that was set up for women, and there she meets some of these amazing women who have gone through so many different things, one of whom is another Rose. I think it's Rosa, and she is a Polish girl who has been experimented on. I don't believe by Mengele, but by the Nazi doctors, and she is an absolute spitfire. Excuse the pun, I did not mean to do that. But she also meets other pilots. She actually meets Russian female pilots in this, and they have a little sign of when they see each other, they'll like the plane wings, and that's what the pilots would do in the air as they pass each other. They would wiggle their wings, and it's just so like heartbreaking because Rose goes through it. Rose absolutely goes through it, and you stay with her and her life in this camp and thinking about her life before and then our life after. It's just so fantastic. So just to quickly go over the others in this series, it's like a companion series, but you kind of do need to read it in a certain order. The Pearl Thief is set before World War II, but just leading up to World War II, and it's a bit more of a backstory with Queenie, or Verity, and her life at Craig Castle, Castle Craig, and her family life, and you see her brothers as well, because her brother is quite a prevalent character in the other books. It also discusses the pearls that used to be available in the River Tay and the people that used to fish these pearls and sell these pearls before sort of big corporations took over and just completely killed it all. The Enigma game is about our main character Louisa, who sort of applies to look after this old woman in Scotland who needs to be watched because she's a German and we need to watch her despite the fact that she's like in her 90s. Louisa is Jamaican, and so she is brought under suspicion just for being a different colour, and the fact that she works for a German lady. In this book you get a lot of, you actually find out, because in these books Jamie is injured, and you find out in this book how he became injured and get that whole story, which by the way, as with wine, just breaks me time and time again. This broke me, these broke me, it just broke me. And yeah, there's a German defector that comes over with an Enigma machine, and it's about them trying to sort of figure out this Enigma machine as well, and the consequences of all of that. It's just fantastic. Lastly, on the Elizabeth Vine sort of train is Firebird. This is just a really short one about a Russian pilot, and she is like, the Russian pilots were amazing, like the female Russian pilots, as I was telling you about the wing wiggle thing that they did. One of the things that these Russian women just went full in with the guerrilla warfare. Like, they would if they were going down, they would make sure they were taking you down with them. And one of the things they used to do to any fighter pilots that came past is they would dip their wing underneath the wing of the other pilot. So if this is the plane coming towards you, if you dip your wing underneath their wing, it sends them spinning off and they would crash. They had like hundreds of kills under their belt from this method because they weren't allowed guns, because they were women and women weren't allowed to fight. But they actually had like a good number. There were actually women in Russia who were snipers who again had hundreds of kills under the belt. There was a Russian woman during World War II who had the most sniper kills during the war. And this is about the Russian pilots. Now, the thing with the Russian pilots is that they were not allowed to land in enemy territory. So if you landed in enemy territory, no matter how long you were there, you were determined to be a traitor. And this is our main character going through a trial and trying to explain why she was in enemy territory and to try and sort of show that she's not in fact a traitor. This is a really short, really quick book, and it is it really opens your eyes about that sort of thing and the sort of mistrust that was happening at the time. Okay, next we move over to America, and this is Sisters in Arms by Kaya Alderson. This is about, as you can see, black women who were in the army during the Second World War, and they were trained up and shipped off to Europe to help in the war in any way they could. I cannot remember for the life of me exactly what they did, but this is about two women who met in their training camp, and it was like enemies to friends. Basically, they hated each other, and one of them disliked the other because of how she was, how frivolous and things she was, and the other one was like, you don't like me, I'm going to make you my friend. And it's just about them in their training, the way they're treated by not only you know, the general public, but the way their superiors treat them, other white members of the armed forces treat them, despite the fact that sometimes they would rank above them. Going through that training, the effect it had on their families, the effect it had on them, the hope of respect that they would have afterwards. It was such a fantastic read, and I highly recommend it. These women are just beautifully written characters, and I bet you didn't know, because I didn't know, that there was a massive influx of black and brown people fighting during World War II. It wasn't just white people fighting white people. Like, they got involved, they got their hands dirty, they decided they wanted to fight for their countries. because they believe in things like Americans. They believed in the freedom that they think that the world should be built on, and they put their money where their mouth is. And I honestly think definitely not enough respect is given to veterans, and especially female veterans. Next up is The German Girl by Amanda Lucas Carrera, and this is a very interesting book for me because it is about a sort of idea and a plan that they had to get Jews to Cuba. And this is about our main character, who is grown up in Germany, and slowly she starts to notice that her Jewish family aren't as welcomed in certain places, and strange flags start to go up, and as the Nazis are rising to power, her whole life is flipped on its head, and then they are trying to, escape to Cuba. And then our second point of view is in 2014, and Anna, who is, in 2014, receives a mysterious package from her great aunt Hannah, who is the first character in the World War II era. And Anna decides she wants to travel to Cuba to find out what happened to her family, how they ended up in America, how her aunt ended up in Cuba, and the mysterious past that happened that nobody will speak about. And again, it's just that thing of generational trauma. It's that thing of learning what happened in the past that still affects your family, how you ended up somewhere, because her family is German, her family is Jewish, and yet they've ended up nowhere near where they started. I love this. You get to see the crossing as well, which is really, really scary. And it just, honestly, hats off to these authors. Next up is a couple of books by Ruta Sepetys. Ruta Sepetys is one of my favourite historical fiction authors. She is the pushing off point that I've had for non-Eurocentric or non-Eastern, Western Eurocentric World War II historical fiction. That was a mouthful. The next two are from Ruta Sepetys, and the first is Between Shades of Grey. This is also a movie called Ashes in the Snow, I believe it's called. I've seen it. It's good. And this is about a family, Lena's family, who are taken out of their house in the middle of the night and sent to a camp in Siberia. Now, Siberia is not the place you want to be, especially without, proper provisions. And it basically throws you into this world that you never knew existed about these camps in Siberia and the way prisoners were treated. Again, it was an internment camp, and although I believe from what I remember for this, they were treated slightly better than people in places like Auschwitz, it was still somewhere where they were degraded and they were left to starve and to freeze and treated in inhumane ways. But as far as I understand, the Russians, for once, were actually not as bad as the Germans. Because it was the Russians that were running this camp. And it's just, again, you don't get to see what happened to some of these people and the things that they had to go through, and barely anybody knows that there was any camps in Siberia. But this sort of smashes that wide open, and the consequences of the fact that these families have lost their homes and been dragged to this desolate, cold climate, and then how they survive through that. It's just so beautiful. Everything Ruta Sepetys writes is just so beautiful. Continuing, that is actually the first Ruta Sepetys book that I ever read, and the one that hooked me. I cannot tell you how much I cried reading this book, and that's Salt of the Sea. This book was the first non-Allied side book that I had ever read. This book follows many different characters. So we've got characters who come from different places, including a German man and a Polish woman. And these characters, they're from all over Europe, who are trying to get to this boat, which is promised to take them across this sea, or this lake, I can't remember exactly what it was, and take them to safety, because the Russians are closing in and they need to escape or they'll be killed. And it is part this journey getting to there, and you also got a German officer as one of the characters on the boat, and the characters that are going there are treating the Polish girl poorly, and you get snippets from each of them in their own sort of voice. The audiobook is a full cast audiobook, and it's fantastic. The discussion about the difficulties of them talking to each other because they spoke different languages, trying to make this trip, trying to sort of keep together as a group and not turn on each other. And then when they get to the boat, this boat is, this was a real thing. This boat was the worst maritime disaster of wartime. So this boat, it had a bigger death count than the Titanic, because it had civilians on it. It had a whole maternity wing inside this boat, but they were carrying soldiers who had weapons on them. And if you're carrying soldiers with weapons or have weapons on the boat during wartime, you cannot fly the flag of the Red Cross. So they were not able to fly this flag, and even boats that were flying this flag were still being attacked by the Russians. So this boat was attacked by the Russians and sunk, and unbelievable numbers of people died. Like I say, more than the Titanic. And I bet you've heard about the Titanic, but I guarantee you haven't heard about this boat. And I can't even remember the name of the boat. The Wilhelm Gustloff. Wilhelm Gustloff. It's Gustloff. Google it. It's unreal. But this book was just fantastic, and it's such a weird found family book as well. It's most definitely a found family, but at the same time it is not a smooth ride. This book had me sobbing in the end. I was driving, reading this book, listening to the audio. I was sobbing. The next one again is not quite World War II. This is Larkswood, and this is during World War II, but not during World War II. So it's the lead up to World War II before Britain got involved. But throughout, you are hearing about the different things that the Nazis are doing, the different things that are being done to Jewish residents, that are happening to Polish residents, to, the point where at the very end it is announced that Germany has invaded Poland and Britain is at war with Germany. That announcement still shakes me up. That whole speech is just unreal. But this is about a historic home, and this is a historic home called Larkswood, obviously. And our main character Louisa is sent there, and something happened 40 years before, and she's trying to work out what happened, while also falling in love with this boy who is inevitably going to be sent to war if Britain declares war on Germany, which obviously we know that's going to happen. They do not. So it's this tense, horrible time while they're trying to figure out what happened in the past, while also have this war hanging over them. And it's so haunting and beautiful, and it is absolutely fantastic. I didn't think I was going to like this, but I absolutely adored it. I can't remember exactly what happened because it's been a while since I read it, but the way it discusses, it looks at this family who've been ripped apart by something that's happened against this backdrop of the war, and it's just absolutely fantastic. I believe probably the first one is set, it was before World War I, so this is, she's trying to figure out something that happened before the First World War, then the First World War happened, and then she's got this lead up to World War II, and it's just fantastic. Next up is the book that probably makes me want to stab people the most, and that is saying something, and that is How We Disappeared by Jing Lee. This is a book about comfort women that the Japanese soldiers used during World War II. So this is set from our main character's point of view, and she is in Singapore, and Japanese troops have swept through Singapore and are taking a daughter or a woman from each family and taking them to be comfort women, which is, it's supposed to be an honour to their family, an honour to their country. What they are, in fact, is sex slaves. Yeah, it's nice, isn't it? So these Japanese soldiers would kidnap women and then lock them in brothels, or, makeshift brothels, and continuously abuse them, and much worse. But think of the worst thing you can think of. It's probably worse. And one thing I appreciate about Jing Lee is that she doesn't hold back. Absolutely doesn't hold back. You are seeing the absolute depth of human trash in this, in the men. And to this day, Japan refuses to apologise. Refuses to acknowledge that it happened. But we know it happened because these women are still alive. These women are still living with the consequences. And I struggled to get through a review of this book without using profanities. There is a reason that it was longlisted for the Women's Prize in Fiction, and I think if it's something that you can handle, I believe you should do this, because these women deserve for us to know what happened to them. They deserve to be heard, they deserve to be known, they deserve to be acknowledged. They deserve much more than that, but that is the best I can give them from where I am, is the acknowledgement that I I hear them, I see them, I believe what happened to them, and that it should never have happened, and that it should not be happening, because things like this will still be happening now, and things like this will happen in the future. And it's reasons like that that we need to acknowledge things like this happened and try and make a world where it's never going to happen again. Andy, you may be saying, there's one book that is significantly missing from this World War II historical fiction, because there is one book that, if you say historical World War II fiction, there's one book that I always bring up. One book that I love beyond all books. The first book I ever bought a duplicate of. The book that has stayed with me, that put a scar on my soul. The book that I will never stop thinking about. The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. I'm sorry, but this hit me like a ton of bricks. This book is unbelievable. It's set during World War II, obviously, in Nazi-occupied France, and it's about these two sisters. One who decides to work for the resistance, or work with the resistance in Paris, and one who is stuck in a village further away than Paris, who is having to house a Nazi somebody. I don't know what rank he is. And it is looking at the different ways that people dealt with having these invaders in their home, because obviously the one that's taken in the Nazi has to be nice to him, it's just to accommodate him and, you know, feed him and things like that, and then they kind of become friends because, you know, they spend so much time together, but the people in our village see that as a traitor's act, which on the one side it is, but on the other side it's not that. It's more complex than that. It is absolutely more complex than that, because these are still people, and you know, in the end he turns out to be a total knob anyway, but that's a given. While her sister is sort of passing messages and doing things for the resistance in Paris, and then starts to help people traverse over the mountains into Spain, which was terrifying, a terrifying thing to even conceptualise. You know, climbing up these mountains in all weathers, like, while there's Nazi patrols with dogs, and like, you have so much time to get over these mountains into Spain, and it's just absolutely terrifying. If you were caught, you were killed, if you were lucky, or you were put into a concentration camp. And of course, our main character, who's helping the resistance, is put into a concentration camp, and you get to see the horrible, horrible things that were done to her, horrible things she experienced there, and when she gets home, the extent of what's happened to her. I cannot tell you how much this broke me. This just shoved its hand into my chest and ripped at my heart. This book, I'd never sobbed like this for a book since the first time I read Me Before You, and that book broke me. This book has put a permanent scar on my heart. So that is my World War II historical fiction recommendations. All of these books are books that I've read and that I've loved, that have stuck out to me in some way, and I really, really hope there's something in there for you to find and for you to read. I do understand that, especially with World War II historical fiction, especially the kind I like, it is quite dark and it is quite raw. I love authors who don't hold back. I love authors who will tell you exactly what happened to people in concentration camps, exactly what happened to people who were experimented on, exactly what happened to people who were caught and tortured. I love that, but I love that they don't try and sort of sugarcoat it and make it more, dress it up to be sort of more acceptable, because what happened to these people was not acceptable. What happened during the Second World War is not acceptable, and I thoroughly agree that we should be concentrating a lot more on the wars and the injustices that happened during the wars and injustices that are happening now, because it's something that should never ever happen again. It is something that we need to make sure we do not repeat, and the only way that we can make sure we do not repeat history is to remember it, and to make sure we are aware of the things that happened, and to make sure that they never happen again. So please be careful if you're going into these books. They're all quite dark, especially like I say, How We Disappear, The Nightingale, Conan Verity and Rose on Fire are also quite dark. The Book Thief, I think, is a lot lighter, as is The War Outside. Fiona Valpy, again, is quite a light, in comparison, read. But yeah, I cannot recommend these highly enough. And please let me know if you read them, and please let me know if this has inspired you to go and find out more about World War II and the atrocities that were committed. This is, as you can probably see, this is very, very important to me. I don't actually have that much personal lean into World War II. My family, thankfully, were very, very safe in World War II. We have always lived in the countryside in a place that was not bombed. Well, actually, one of the areas near to us was bombed quite a lot, but they didn't quite do a good job at bombing it, so it tended to go into the sea or into the Forth. So, you know, we lived in the countryside, we weren't bombed that often. Because it's a lot of farmland, nobody really starved all that much. And my great-grandparents who were alive at the time were in jobs, so like one of my great-grandfathers was a coal miner. I think both of them might have been coal miners, so didn't actually have to go to war because they were needed so badly in the pits. It was a protected job, so they didn't have to go to war. So I don't have anybody that I know of in my family that suffered any of the horrendous consequences of World War II, and I have to say I'm grateful, because I can't imagine what it would be like to go through that, and you know, I don't wish that on anybody. But you know, like I say, please let me know if you read any of these books, if it's inspired you to look into it anymore, and thank you very much for watching this again. I don't know what I'll be recommending next. I don't know if I'll do maybe contemporaries, romances, fantasies. If you have any opinions on what you'd like to hear about, a genre that you'd like to hear about, please let me know down below. Again, all my links are down below. Thank you very much for watching this. If you liked it, please like it and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.